Kirsten Bayes, who's from the UK-based organisation called Campaign Against Arms Trade, which is working hard to end the international arms trade. So, over to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, and I'll stand up because there's kind of more people in the room, and I like to be able to see everybody's face. So thank you for inviting me. Really pleased to come to sort of talk here. Campaign Against Arms Trade, I'm talking for, has been running since 1974. So we've been talking about these sort of issues for 50 years. I wish I could tell you that they are no longer relevant, but clearly we're at a time when they continue to be. I think what I'm going to do is maybe talk a little bit about Israel and what arms trading has meant to the state of Israel over its existence, and then talk about what British arms trading is doing. First thing to say is Israel receives massive financial aid from the United States, currently running at about $3.5–4 billion dollars a year. Total life of Israel is about $150 billion. Most of that money is spent on warplanes and missiles, but warplanes and missiles, essentially aviation and missiles, primarily bought from US companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, RTX Raytheon being key examples of where most of Israel's military equipment is coming from. It's taking place in the context of Israel feeling the need to arm itself, both to establish the state but also to defend itself as it sees it from its neighbours. So it has this kind of paranoia that unless it's spending billions of dollars on weaponry, that it will be overrun. And so it used to buy a lot of its weapons from the French, and then 1967 happened, and the French put in an arms embargo, so it decided that it would no longer buy weapons from the French, even when the embargo was lifted. And so everybody that supplies weapons to Israel, and who makes a lot of money doing it, knows that if they cut off the supply, they probably will never get the business back. And so their second or third homes or their second or third yachts are probably not going to happen. So there's a kind of big financial incentive to keep the kind of war machine turning. The other thing to think about is that Israel's doesn't fight that many wars in the way that we think of them. Most of its military is designed to essentially oppress and murder civilians. Maybe armed civilians, maybe what Israel would call terrorists, but, civilians. So its military is really built around the oppression of Palestinians and also, if you like, securing, as it sees it, its northern border, taking on Hezbollah, which are also often armed civilians. So a lot of its weaponry and everything else is built around maintaining or containing these populations, and as it calls it, battle testing its weapons, it would say. The other thing to think about Israel is that it's one of the world's biggest arms exporters. It would say it is a bigger arms exporter than the UK. And because arms exports kind of often take place under the table with governments kind of shipping things without anybody paying any attention to it, they may be right. They may well be right. And so when you're looking at what's going into Israel, they are creating weapons to test, as they see it, on Palestinians, which is murder Palestinians, and then sell the results of that murder and that oppression and those human rights abuses to other countries who want to do the same. So that's what's going on with Israel. So when you're selling into that environment, when you're the Teledynes of this world, how are you doing it? Well, you're sitting in the UK, and supposing I want to sell a weapon to a psychopath, because that's what we're talking about, people who want to kill people, you need a license for that. And so you get two types of licenses mainly two, there's others, but there's two big types of licenses. There's licenses for scary weapon systems, warplanes, things that go bang, very militarised licenses. And then there's licenses for stuff that could be used in weapon systems, but might be used in telecommunications, or might be used in other things. But the thing about it is, if you want to export weapons, you need to get the permission of the UK government. And what the UK government says, according to its own laws, is that if there's a chance, and it's only a chance, if there's a chance that these weapons could be used to abuse human rights, or to kill innocent civilians, commit war crimes, bomb schools, bomb hospitals, that those licenses should be revoked. Friends, I'm sorry to tell you that they haven't been. Certainly not with what we're shipping to Israel. That hasn't happened. You might say, well, maybe there's no evidence of what's happened. And yet, you know, there's a court case that's being run through the High Court, and they have produced evidence of hundreds of war crimes. I was at a meeting on Friday, and they were saying that even if you just look at the bombing of schools and hospitals, even if you just look at that narrow segment, which not bombing people's homes, which is still terrible, or shooting people in the street, still terrible, just that bit, they were saying that there are something like 500 people killed in those sorts of incidents, and dozens of incidents that could add up to that. So clearly the government is not, at the moment, responding to public pressure to stop arms sales to Israel. And it's interesting, when it was David Cameron who was doing it, he was saying, well, it's not very much. It's hardly anything. You know, I think we've just talked about the fact that, you know, Israel's bought $150 billion worth of weaponry, and absolutely $4 billion a year. Compared to that, it's not a lot, but it's still significant amounts of money. We think since Lockheed Martin started selling the F-35 combat aircraft to Israel, something like 15% of which is built in the UK, that's added up to some 400 million pounds. And that's just the kind of top level stuff. There's another 400 million pounds of other arms exports to Israel in that time. So it's serious amounts of money in what we would think of as money. And the output of it has been the chaos, death, destruction, and let's call it what it is, murder of thousands of civilians. So the question we're asking is, well, what role does Teledyne have in all of this? Because that's one of the reasons that we're talking here. And the answer is, it's not as clear as we would like. And it's partly because of the opacity, the kind of difficulty of the licensing system, the lack of transparency, the inability to kind of find out exactly what they're doing. But we do know that Teledyne has applied for licenses from the UK for GPS-related components, military GPS-related components, and jamming, but I would suspect it's targeting components. We know that they have applied for weapon sites and bombing computer type exports, and we know that they have applied for what we call ML4. I love these kind of codes like ML4, bombs, torpedoes, rockets, and associated equipment. It's bombs. So for me, as we look at some of this, and they've had something like 130 of these licenses over since 2008. So quite a lot of licenses. A lot of it was primarily in the early 2010s, and now they're getting kind of regular but smaller amounts. So what it looks to me like, and we can't prove this, we don't know, maybe local people have heard differently, is that an Israeli arms company that we've talked about has been building missiles and such, getting lots of components from the UK to do it, and now is basically buying more components to maintain that system. But we don't know what the system is. But it's definitely being licensed by the UK, definitely being used for military purposes. And what military purposes will it be used for? Well, I can tell you, it's obviously being used in Gaza and the West Bank. So I think as we're, as a team here, deciding what to do about that, I think the point that we've just heard, that the arms factories that make this stuff are not on the moon, they're not in the sea, they're in neighbourhoods and towns just like this. And absolutely, something's going on in the arms factory, and anything we can do to bring it to an end would be a really good thing, because the government's not going to do it. If they were going to do it, they would have done it by now, but they're not. So it has to be up to us. So thank you very much, and really good.